Arthur Andersen was a young man who started small, but he had a big dream and a wide vision. Very simply, he wanted to create what he called a different kind of firm. Not surprising, really, because Arthur Andersen was a different kind of accountant. And if ever there was a self-made man, that man was Andersen. Orphaned at age 16 with barely 8 years of formal schooling, young Arthur worked days and studied evenings to get his high school diploma. He repeated that pattern to earn a college degree in an era when college graduates were rare. And rarer still, he became a university professor even before he received his own degree. Today, Andersen would be called a moonlighter and a workaholic, but in the early years of the century, he was just another first-generation American who had inherited from Scandinavian parents a severe work ethic, a fierce pride in self, an attitude of grim determination, and no financial nest egg. By 1913, Andersen already had compiled an awesome record of achievement. Assistant controller for a large manufacturer, staff accountant for Price Waterhouse and Company, the youngest CPA in Illinois at age 23, controller of the Eline family interests, including Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company, assistant professor and head of the Northwestern University School of Accounting at age 23, consultant to top business executives, including Henry Ford, and finally, at the ripe age of 28, co-owner of a small accounting firm. That accounting firm, founded at the turn of the century, was still small when Andersen and Clarence Delaney, a fellow Price Waterhouse alumnus, bought the firm for $4,000 and renamed it Andersen, Delaney and Company. They opened on December 1st, 1913. In their first full year of operation, they had $45,000 in fees. More importantly, the visionary, hard-driving Andersen already had started reshaping his firm to make it different from all the rest. He had, for instance, started discharging his inherited staff of 6 journeyman accountants and hired his first college graduate, Grant Chandler, who joined the firm when it was only 3 weeks old. Andersen wanted people who understood business and could help their clients improve their operations and profitability. And he knew the part-time school teachers, bookkeepers, and commercial school graduates who formed the core of accounting firms in that period couldn't provide useful business advice, couldn't provide the foundation for a different kind of firm. That might have been Arthur Andersen's first experience in shattering the icons of his chosen profession, but it certainly wasn't the last. To mention just a few of his pioneering steps in the early years of the firm, Andersen was the first to insist on a business-oriented approach to auditing, focus heavily on consulting services in addition to traditional compliance services, hire full-time, year-round staff personnel, create a program to recruit new college graduates, adopt a 5-day work week, pay for overtime work, create uniform central, devise a one-firm philosophy to treat all personnel alike, regardless of their areas of practice or geographical location. That list is by no means exhaustive, but it serves to underscore the point that Andersen was a leader, not a follower, a man willing not only to accept change, but to create it. Later generations of partners and employees have shared that willingness to confront and manage change. Through the 1920s, Andersen built a strong foundation for his new firm and continued to insist that the true value of accounting professionals lay in their role as business advisors. By the end of that decade, fees had reached $2 million, and the firm was beginning to explore opportunities for international expansion. But the 1929 stock market crash and the ensuing Great Depression caused Andersen to shelve those plans. In the 30s, it was a battle for businesses of all types and sizes merely to survive, and thousands of them didn't make it. Arthur Andersen and Company did. Optional services, including audits, diminished sharply until the Securities Acts of 1933 and 1934 made audits mandatory for U.S. public companies. But Andersen had never been much interested in routine compliance work, except as a door opener for what he called creative work, business-oriented services that helped executives manage more effectively. Among those services were functional or responsibility accounting and property record systems, two 1930s innovations that helped keep revenues flowing in the darkest years of the Depression. The firm's work in connection with the Chicago and New York World Fairs also was an important contributor to survival. And it was in this decade, too, that, notwithstanding the rising winds of war, the firm established its first international ties in Europe, Latin America, Australia, and the Far East. But the most important engagement of the 30s involved the firm's work with the tottering Insull utility empire, which included some of the Edison companies. When Samuel Insull's network of companies were unable to make scheduled loan payments to New York banks, the Eastern bankers called on Arthur Andersen to serve as their on-site representative in Chicago to oversee the financial operations of the Insull companies and approve all payments made by them. Among those who worked on the engagement was Leonard Spacek, who later succeeded Andersen as head of the firm. Spacek recalls how Arthur Andersen and Company was selected to work on the Insull companies.
And that's where they chose Arthur Andersen, because he was independent, he spoke his mind, he did all the things, so they said that's the man to put. They didn't want anybody they couldn't trust. So Arthur Andersen took over, and we had partners and managers in all of the companies. And we approved every expenditure they made over, I think it was $1,000, to make sure that it didn't go among companies, didn't go to an officer, and stayed within that particular company. And all the revenues had to stay with that company to hold it constant. And then the reorganization of the Edison companies started after that.
The firm observed its 25th anniversary in 1938 with the worst of the Great Depression behind it, but with the worst of the Great War just ahead. Looking back, Andersen remarked that the firm had emerged from the bleak years with a larger and better reputation than when we entered the Depression. In the early years of the 1940s, the firm faced severe wartime personnel shortages and a spate of new accounting problems. The so-called excess profits tax, special war reserves, contract renegotiations, and at war's end, the sudden termination of war contracts. Soon after the war ended and conditions began to return to normal, Arthur Andersen died. After 33 years of the founder's leadership, the partners were unsure of their future and divided by growing differences between the Chicago and New York offices. In despair, they voted in January 1947 to dissolve the firm. Then a 39-year-old disciple of Arthur Andersen stepped forward to persuade the partners to keep the firm going. His name was Leonard Spacek, and in the next 16 years, he drove the firm to the top of its profession. But the period following Andersen's death and Spacek's assumption of leadership was a worrisome period for a firm that even then had annual fees of only about $6 million. Financial pressures were especially troubling in view of the lifetime annuity the partners provided the Andersen estate. Despite the problems, Spacek and his partners proved themselves equal to the challenge. They even agreed to take on new ones, specifically the creation of a truly international firm and the development of a unique systems practice to take its place alongside the accounting and tax practices. In the 1950s, Spacek scrapped existing agreements with other firms and began sending his own personnel abroad to help integrate acquired firms or establish new operations. The cost of this expansion program was enormous, and the money came directly out of current profits, often as much as 1/3 of partners' earnings. But in the long run, this investment in internationalism, together with the partners' commitment to continue to operate as one firm, became one of the factors that set the Arthur Andersen Worldwide Organization distinctly apart from its competitors. Another major investment of time, energy, and of course money was required to create a sound systems practice. From the outset, Arthur Andersen had felt that business consultation was a key to his creation of a different kind of firm, and he saw, even in the very early days, an opportunity to help clients install financial and accounting systems. When the firm was still very young, Andersen began hiring industrial engineers as well as accountants. Spacek himself had spent much of his time in consulting projects rather than in straight auditing. And like Andersen, he had a particular affinity for this creative side of the business. Spacek had, in fact, advanced the concept of systems consulting with his innovative 1930s work on functional accounting systems. He used punched card technology to help make the system more efficient, and he was one of the first to see the vast potential in using high-speed computers to perform business functions. The only computer manufacturer that agreed with the bullish Arthur Andersen view was Remington Rand, producer of the UNIVAC. So it was a UNIVAC that Arthur Andersen and General Electric installed in 1954 at GE's Appliance Park facility to usher in what became known as the computer age. Another significant event in this period involved an unofficial meeting of the heads of the largest accounting firms plus 2 or 3 fringe firms, one of which was Arthur Andersen and Company. Leonard Spacek represented the firm. Spacek was told that the larger, more successful accounting firms would lead the profession and that the smaller firms must acknowledge this. To those who know him, Spacek's reaction was predictable.
I said to myself at that time, if it's bigness that it takes to have any say in the accounting profession, why then we'll concentrate on first things first. We'll get big.
Spacek had little difficulty in communicating his vision to others, and the firm took off on a worldwide growth binge that saw fees rise from $8 million in 1950 to $190 million 20 years later. Other firms were growing too in this boom period, but not nearly as fast as Arthur Andersen. When the firm observed its 50th anniversary in 1963, Spacek passed the baton of leadership to Walter Oliphant and took on a new role as chairman. In common with Spacek, Oliphant was an internationalist, and the firm's expansion in the 1960s reflected that. Of the 51 offices opened by Arthur Andersen and Company during that decade, 31 were outside the United States. The firm solidified its leadership in information technology during the 60s and began developing specialized software packages. In a field where standards were loose and often non-existent, Arthur Andersen and Company blazed a trail with publication of its multi-volume EDP reference binder, a forerunner of today's Method 1 systems development methodology. Innovation and the ongoing growth momentum continued to drive the firm forward in the 70s. At the beginning of the decade, Wally Oliphant stepped down as head of the firm, and the partners elected Harvey Kapnick to succeed him. One of Kapnick's first moves was to acquire a small college in St. Charles, Illinois, and begin transforming it into today's huge Center for Professional Education. Kapnick created a number of other landmarks of progress during that dizzying decade. Among other things, he was the driving force behind creation of the Arthur Andersen Public Review Board, the profession's first independent oversight group. Publication in 5 languages of the first annual report by a worldwide professional partnership. Establishment of Arthur Andersen and Company Société Coopérative in Geneva, Switzerland, to assure continuance of the founder's unique one-firm philosophy of operation. In 1979, however, Kapnick stepped down, stung by the negative reaction of partners to his proposal to split off the consulting practice to avoid regulatory problems. He relinquished his leadership position and retired from the firm. That brought in Richard Boland, who served as acting chief executive while the firm worked its way through the time-consuming process of choosing a new leader. The 1980s began with the election of Duane Kohlberg to head the worldwide organization. Among Kohlberg's contributions have been a streamlining of the capital structure, a major expansion of the Center for Professional Education, and the addition of the SGV Group to the Arthur Andersen Worldwide Organization. A primary influence on the direction of the organization in the 80s has been the rapid advance of technology, which has affected every area of practice. Arthur Andersen tax professionals today draw on an expanding library of specialized software, much of it proprietary, to enhance their speed and efficiency. Auditors use software of their own together with a unique proprietary compact disc to aid in their work. And Andersen consulting personnel are using technology to take the worldwide organization into fascinating new areas of practice, such as computer-integrated manufacturing, software development, strategic planning, and the mushrooming field of systems integration. A phenomenon of this decade is the need to move information technology specialists quickly from one location to another to respond to ever more sophisticated client demands. To meet this need, the worldwide organization has implemented a structural reorganization. Now, for the first time, co-equal managing partners of accounting, audit and tax, and managing directors of Andersen Consulting share management responsibility at the office level. As the worldwide organization enters its 76th year, it is larger, stronger, and in some ways more diverse than ever before. But it continues to think straight and talk straight, to operate throughout the world as one firm, to speak with one voice, and to nurture a global vision of client service that sets the Arthur Andersen Worldwide Organization apart from its myriad competitors. Looking back over 3/4 of a century of growth and progress, the thread that runs from 1913 to the present is the vision that Arthur Andersen began with, his determination to create a different kind of firm to respond not only to the accounting and tax needs of his clients, but to their business needs as well. The results suggest that Andersen and his successors have succeeded, and their track record up to now suggests that all their tomorrows can be every bit as bright as their yesterdays.